Feeding the hungry, now a crime? Across America, pastors are being arrested for serving meals to the poor. Laws meant to regulate public space are colliding with faith, compassion, and the question no one expected to ask: when did charitable actions become illegal? Welcome to Faith and Politics, a show dedicated to discussing issues surrounding the intersection of church, state, and politics, and the examination of whether you are allowing your faith to shape your politics or your politics starting to shape your faith. In other words, what do you do when God and government come face to face? I'm your host, Orlin Johnson. Let me introduce you to our guest panelists for today. First, we have Ms. Carmela Monk Crawford, editor of Message Magazine. We have with us Ms. Melissa Reed, Director of Government Affairs for the North American Division of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. We also have with us Ms. Bettina Krause, Editor of Liberty Magazine, and Ms. Jennifer Woods, General Counsel and Director of Public Affairs and Religious Liberty for the Lake Union Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Ladies, great having you here again and looking forward to our conversation. You know, a few months ago, E.B. Raines Jr. Memorial Park in North Glen, Colorado, had some volunteers from 3 local churches who were setting up tables under the pavilion, preparing to distribute hot meals to the homeless, just as they have done peacefully every Tuesday and Thursday for the past 4 years. But on this particular cold day, 1 week before Christmas, there were pastors who are faithful men and women driven by a deep conviction to live out their calling. They had to leave feeding the hungry in the park and then find themselves going to court to fight over an issue that we thought was already settled. But what we have going on here shortly thereafter, we find ourselves in a situation where we are wondering, why do I have to leave my ministry to go to court when I have a situation that I'm helping people, but it turns out they were violating a city ordinance simply by gathering in the park and exercising their faith? You know, Bettina, I never thought I'd have to ask the question, when did it become illegal to feed the homeless in the park? But it looks like we are living in a society nowadays that we are more concerned about the letter of the law than maybe the spirit of the law. And now instead of being out feeding the homeless, I'm in court fighting citations because, quote unquote, I should not have been there and we were gathering, even though I've done this for the last 4 years. Am I missing something here, or where are we going, or could you ever imagine we'd be having these type of conversations?
Well, Orlin, I completely share your concerns. I mean, the top line takeaway from this is the Constitution doesn't just protect belief, it protects action contingent on that belief. And so these pastors who are in the park serving the homeless, this is a direct expression of their faith. And that is a constitutionally protected activity. Furthermore, this is a public park, as you've pointed out. This is what we call in law a traditional public forum. You know, so speech, assembly, religious activity, all of these things receive the highest level of constitutional protection in that sort of environment. So if you can't practice your faith there, I'm not sure where you can practice it. The twist in this, of course, is that the city is citing safety concerns. And that is why they brought in this ordinance, which basically says that if there's 5 people or more using public pavilions in the park on a recurring basis, they can receive these criminal citations. Concerns of public safety, they're important. I mean, that's not controversial. The real legal question here is whether the city is going about addressing it in the right way. And I would argue that they are most certainly not.
Wow.
Yeah, so Orlin, I completely agree that public spaces should be open to one and all. I also agree that there is a legitimate safety concern here. And in the articles that I was reading, as far as the news coverage of this particular story, individuals who had committed this crime were in fact attendees, 100% attendees for this public feeding of the homeless.
Yeah.
So it was much less, I think, about getting rid of the homeless population, but rather getting rid of a legitimate public safety concern. That said, what was most troubling to me, and Bettina pointed this out as well, or alluded to this, was that it seemed like this new ordinance was not being equally enforced. And so there were other organizations that were having gatherings in the park that were not being cited, that were not being approached about this, this behavior. And so that to me is, again, the concern, because I feel like religious organizations in the last few years have been crying wolf a lot, saying that everything that they're accused of is a violation of their religious freedom. I don't think that that's the situation here. I completely agree with Bettina. There's a real issue of public safety, but this is the wrong way to address it.
I got to tell you, Jennifer, I've actually been out to give away food to the homeless in a park, and I've seen it get completely out of control. Trying to keep people online, trying to determine how many bags you take. When there's a certain level of desperation that people feel when they get into circumstances, I'm not sure that you can always control the environment. So on one hand, I get the public safety piece, because I've actually been to environments where they've given away food to the homeless and people left injured because of the inability to kind of control things. But it seems as though there's got to be another way to deal with this, or maybe there's not. I don't know. What are your thoughts, Jennifer?
Yeah, I mean, as I was reading news articles on this as well, it did look as if there had been some issues, right? Over the years, since 2020, there had been a number of complaints about these meetings and, these events taking place. There had been calls from many people from the public. So it sounds like the city was trying to respond to something. But how they did it in this targeted way of targeting these churches from doing what, their ministry called them to do, I don't think it was the most effective way, right? There are many cities that will have permits, for example. They could have gone through other means of making sure that these events took place in a controlled manner, maybe having additional officers there, maybe having a permit fee to kind of handle some of those public safety concerns. But instead, the city decided just to give this, to bar these activities and to do it in such a way that it was very apparent that it was targeting this particular activity from these particular churches.
Carmela, you troubled by this?
Yes, I'm troubled by the fact, since when do Christians have to come off as being so litigious? Nobody had to put down their stuff at the park and run to court. And since when does the city want to come across as not welcoming the feeding of the homeless that they have out there already because they don't have services? What the ministry and the government agency that needs to happen right now is some kind of mediation between these two kinds of parties who can't figure out how to do this, right? Obviously, there was a safety concern. You have somebody offering alcohol to a kid in the bathroom. You've got other things. So people don't want to bring their families anymore. That's a legitimate community concern. Likewise, it is a legitimate community concern that people have food to eat for the unhoused. I don't understand why we're in court over this. When I was looking through this, I saw that there is a Department of Defense, a directory of food services programs that are run by churches. The government and the church somehow work symbiotically in this kind of thing. No one is informing the other, but you do have to work together. Okay, church people, do this in the parking lot of Walmart or at your church if it's that bad, right? Or, city, we're going to block off the hours so that the church can get this, because this is a service, a valuable humanitarian service. And so I just don't understand how we got to this point. It's a shame. So I'm sorry you asked me.
No, I love your response, Carmela, because again, it points out to, shouldn't the church also be concerned, not just with feeding one population group, but the safety of the broader community.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think there's bad actors on both ends. I say bravo, Carmela.
I think so too, Carmela. That was a wonderful, wonderful response. But I do want to double down on one point, and that is what happened here. The scenario that did play out, I think, is reflective of what plays out in situations, similar situations across the nation, where we have a church group that is engaged in a religiously motivated activity, and for some reason they get across the city for, it could be something big, it could be something small, but the response of the city is to pass some sort of ham-fisted ordinance such as this, broad, no one meeting with more than 5 people on a recurring basis may meet in the park. If that is not an example of this sort of broad strokes, non-neutral targeting of a specific religious activity, I don't know what is. So, yes, we don't want to be perceived as litigious. Christians shouldn't be seen as running to court all the time, but we do have a responsibility to make sure that good precedent is set.
Can we say, though, that yes, maybe they were targeting them, but I would doubt that the yoga group or the Tai Chi group that meets every week at the pavilion is attracting the kind of people and the numbers of people, and as Orlin mentioned, the kinds of difficulties there. So yes, that's why this should not have ended up in court. The city should have said, look, the folks that you are serving, this is a sort of an unwieldy crowd.
Yeah.
Let's manage this specifically, not you, but this situation, so that it doesn't have to feel so directed toward the church activities.
Yeah, I mean, that's true, but we don't know from our vantage point where that communication broke down.
Yeah.
We don't know how it came about that these two groups were not able to work together to come up with a solution.
Yeah.
And I think, as Melissa, said earlier, it is incumbent on Christians also to show themselves to be willing to engage in that sort of back and forth that finds solutions. But still, I still want to make the point. We can't abandon legal precedent.
Bettina's making an excellent point as far as we are seeing in certain, portions of our country a growing, and I think the word hostility is not an exaggeration towards religious people of faith, right? Yeah. And when I was reading about this case, there was evidently one very similar in a nearby community where a city had sued a church because they were allowing RVs to stay overnight in their parking lot, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So again, it's very likely that there was a bias towards religious organizations, and we absolutely, that's inconsistent with the nation that our founding documents, and I think it's inconsistent as who we are as Americans.
Well, I don't have to let that be the last word, but we've gotten to a point in our society where litigation is just cool. If you're not going to court, you're not doing anything. But we've just got to tamp it down, find a balance, and make sure we're doing what's in the best interest of all people. Coming up, therapists are being threatened with fines and jail time for not offering body-altering interventions for patients with gender dysphoria. Stick around, we'll be right back. When faith and government collide, the issues can be complex and consequential. Faith and Politics explores how religious conviction intersects with law, policy, and public life, offering depth, balance, and clarity with meaningful discussion and trusted insight. To see a bunch of our previous episodes, check us out at faithandpolitics.tv and subscribe to us on YouTube. There's an interesting case called Wyatt Bury, LLC versus City of Kansas City. Across the country, children struggling with gender dysphoria are often pushed towards gender transitions involving drugs, hormones, and surgeries that can cause profound regret and irreversible harm. Recognizing these risks, 26 states and several European countries have banned or limited such interventions for minors, favoring compassionate counseling Instead, we see what's happening in Kansas City and Jackson County, Missouri in particular, where they prohibit this approach. They are threatening therapists like Wyatt Bury and Pamela Eisenreich, who are Christians who want to provide compassionate counseling informed by their faith to children and families who seek them out with fines now and even jail time. You know, Jennifer, when I start seeing that we're trying to figure out how to deal with young people who are going through really, really tough situations, you know, gender issues and things of that nature, which seem to be more and more prevalent, we don't seem to be able to find a right balance as to where you give them all the opportunities that may be available, but also allow some compassionate counseling. And we're also even talking about minors here, which makes it even more complicated. How do we fix this, or are we just simply going to be stuck in crazy world forever whenever gender issues come up, and what we can do from a medical standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping that we can find some balance at some point. It seems that, you know, looking at this historically, there's been this like pendulum swing, right? Like, so you have this era of really extreme forms of conversion therapy or therapies that have been documented as very harmful to individuals, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And in response to that, now we have, you know, Kansas City and various counties and states that are saying, no, we're going to put a complete ban on this. Not just the physically harmful practices, but even talking, right? Even just speech, engaging in dialogue, simply providing a different viewpoint. If someone says, hey, I want to change, or I'm uncomfortable with this, can we talk through it? There's only one type of conversation that's allowed under these conversion therapy bans. And I think that that's what's very troubling to me, and especially because we're dealing with minors, right? So let's say we have a 7-year-old girl who comes in and says, I think I'm a boy. To tell a therapist or a counselor that the only type of dialogue that you can have with that child is to say, well, you must be a boy. Let's talk through, you know, how you are a boy and how this happened. To say that that's the only kind of dialogue that can take place, and that the therapist can't say, let's talk about this some more, or to maybe push back, because again, we're talking about children, right? And children sometimes change their views. And studies have shown that oftentimes a child might come in with some form of gender dysphoria, and if you give them time, things will work themselves out in many different ways, right? But to say you have to start affirming their initial feelings, that's the only kind of therapy that you can engage in. I think that we've seen the pendulum swing all the way to the other side, and we're really leaving out the ability to engage in some further conversations that could be beneficial for the child. And again, I think that we're losing the focus of who we're trying to treat here. We're trying to treat vulnerable children who are going through a difficult time in their lives.
Carmela, seems like a huge struggle, and you almost don't see a role for parents in this. You know, it's like a minor child wants to move forward with something. This is the only way it can happen. You know, I'm starting to see more and more rules and regulations and changes that are coming about that almost aren't even taking into consideration that a parent gets to parent. A child decides they want to do this, and now basically society swoops in and says, allow it to take place. I mean, thank God my mother didn't allow me to do everything that crossed my mind, right? So these are things that are helpful. I mean, are we missing something here, or is it the idea that government maybe thinks they know better, or what are you thinking when you hear these type of cases?
I feel sorry, number one, for the young people who are experiencing gender dysphoria.
Yeah.
The more you read about it, the more you see that people are they're struggling.
Yeah.
And like you say, the parents are struggling and the government is struggling. To me, the issue in this case is not so much the parent, it's not so much the child, but the therapist who's waltzing into court claiming my free speech rights are being implicated. The question is, when you walk into that therapy room, who are you? Right now, I'm personally, I'm a Christian, and it is important to me to share my faith. And it's important to me to share my faith when everybody doesn't necessarily think that this is the time and place for that. But the question is, in certain circumstances, Who are you in that circumstance, and how much can you do? Now, while I agree with the court and the court that came down regarding the Colorado case on conversion therapy, I do agree with some of the points that Ketanji Brown Jackson is raising in the lone dissent, right? Your free speech under certain circumstances can be sort of shaped by what the laws are and the general interest. So when you walk into that therapy room, it's not just you, but we see this as a wave of people exercising their free speech rights,
Yeah.
whether it's the coach on the football field who wants to pray, whether it's the person who wants to or doesn't want to design the wedding cake for a gay couple. It's my free speech rather than the service that's being offered. And I think that's a big shift that we have to continue to look at. Service are you providing and to whom?
Well, could I jump in here just a second?
Sure.
Carmela alluded to the Supreme Court case that came down in March of 2026, and which is reflective of this exact situation, right? The case out of Colorado with the Christian therapist and the free speech issues. Well, that case was decided by the Supreme Court 8-1, and with Gorsuch writing the opinion there and saying that this was the language of the ordinance, and again in Colorado, but we are seeing similar ordinances. I think I saw upwards of 20 different, similar ordinances around the nation, but saying that language was way too lenient of a standard for, as Jennifer was saying, what's being described as or cataloged as conversion therapy. And Jennifer described what is just straight up abuse that happened previously under the name of conversion therapy, right? I think very few individuals who call themselves Christians are wanting or approve of that sort of, barbaric, abusive behavior. But for a therapist, and again, we're talking about minor individuals, a parent may choose a therapist specifically because they are spiritually based, because they are a Christian. And so I don't think that the therapist should be required to leave their faith at the door of their, professional practice. I think they, very often parents choose that individual because they are coming from a particular perspective. So just those are my 2 and 3 cents.
So, I want to jump in here and maybe go back to Carmela's description of, the legal regime we're living under now, which is a very robust protection of free speech.
Right.
That is a situation I'm not losing much sleep over. Because if I had the choice between living in a nation where free speech is robustly protected or a nation where the state has the right to dictate appropriate speech, I do know which nation I would prefer to live in. Yes, there are situations where free speech can be curtailed. This is not one of them. I mean, this is a situation where government viewpoint discrimination, which is really what we're talking about here, where government viewpoint discrimination, we don't want it held hostage to the vagaries of political winds or whatever is the most popular point of view at the time. We need our medical professionals in the therapy field to be able to engage with individuals as individuals using the full range of tools in their toolbox to meet the needs of that patient. So I think where we're going, the regime that we're under at the moment, is on the whole a good thing. I would not exchange it for any other approach to free speech protection.
I think, though, Jennifer, the struggle, I guess, is limiting people to bring their full toolbox to a situation seems to be an inappropriate way to be handling things. The idea that let's stop it here, let's don't consider this here. And, and as Melissa pointed out, there's sometimes you go to a specific therapist because of the quote unquote other things about them. Not just the fact that they've been trained, in a certain science and things of that nature. And why not let the full toolbox go to work? And then we all sit back and make a choice which one we want to go with. But there's an idea of don't even make that even available.
Yeah, and I think that, I appreciate Carmela's reframing of this, right? That yeah, even though legally we're talking about free speech, we're also talking about the services that are being provided, right? And here we're talking about therapists and counselors providing therapy and counseling. And the state, by having these bans, is really tying the hands of these therapists and giving the full panoply of services, right? We're saying you can only provide therapy, you can only provide counseling if you're going to affirm these ideologies. And if you're going to speak in any way that's against that, then you can't provide therapy, even if you think that that is in the best interest of your client, right? So when we talk about services, we're really talking about a state hampering the ability of professionals to provide their professional services in the way that they see fit. So I think whether you look at it from a services perspective or from a free speech legal perspective, what these states are doing and what these cities are doing, it's very overbroad, even if their end goal is one that we agree with.
Orlin, just a few years ago, we had these discussions regarding whether or not a service provider could even mention the word abortion. And so under other circumstances, the same interests do not want you to mention options that they would not agree with.
Yeah. Yep.
So I find the rub there. And all I'm saying is, let's be honest about the train that we're on right now and the interests behind this kind of litigation. Like I said, I agree with this, but there's a bigger picture.
I'm gonna let that be the last word, Carmela. And I think there is a bigger picture. And I think the picture really has to revolve around the fact that most people who are looking to gather information really don't have their preconceived answers. They need information to be informed, to hopefully make the right decisions. And hopefully people will be in a position to get what they need so that they can make the best choice, in particular when we're dealing with minors. Hey, Bettina, tell me something I don't know.
Well, Orlin, did you know that there is an American entomologist who allowed more than 80 types of wasps, bees, and other bitey things to sting him just so he could scientifically rate the levels of pain they produced? That is definitely a commitment to science.
Amen. Carmela, tell me something I don't know.
Talk about a commitment to feeding and helping people. I'm watching this Oklahoma bill that's targeting people who give material support to undocumented immigrants. And in the course of this ordinance could make it a felony to do so.
Wow, hadn't heard about that one. Melissa, tell me something I don't know.
All right, Orlin, we mentioned Kansas City. Well, did you know that Walt Disney's first animation studio was headquartered in Kansas City back in 1912? And in fact, it was that studio that had a frequent friendly little mouse visitor who became our beloved Mickey Mouse.
Did not know that. Jennifer, tell me something I don't know.
Sure. So in the first segment, we talked about a public park. And did you know that since 2017, San Francisco has been recognized as the first major U.S. city where 100% of its residents are within a 10-minute walk of a public park?
Did not know that. Ladies, it is great having you here. Always learn something new. And thank you again for being with us. Hope you enjoyed our conversation. Just remember, if it's about God and government, it's faith and politics. See you next time.